There are plenty of research studies to support the harmful effects that stress can have on our bodies. But in this video, I'll be looking at how stress affects our brain function and how that can damage or even ruin our relationships with friends, family, and co-workers. The good news is that the better we understand the problem, the better we can manage it and reduce its negative impact. Let's see how it works. Hi, I'm Andre from rewireandthrive.com. Today we live in a highly competitive world where stress levels are higher than ever. And many people tell themselves that it's just part of life and don't give it a second thought. But the truth is, high levels of stress affect us negatively on a physical, mental, and emotional level. It can cause a variety of negative emotions, including anxiety, anger, frustration, and panic attacks. And these emotions can cause us to lash out at the people we love or to withdraw from them entirely. And it can make us say things we don't mean or do things we later regret. Therefore, it's important that we manage our stress on a daily basis. But what's really happening with us when we are stressed? What is it about stress that causes us to sometimes lose control and behave in aggressive, irrational, impulsive, or sometimes just plain embarrassing ways? Many effects of stress are well documented, but one of the more overlooked areas is its effect on cognitive function. Stress affects our thoughts, feelings, and behavior by changing how the brain functions during stressful times. Stress is a natural part of our day-to-day lives. It's needed to get us through the tough days and can help us perform at our best under pressure. However, when stress becomes unmanageable, it can have a very negative impact on our relationships with colleagues, friends, and loved ones. So what do I mean by unmanageable? We all have a window of tolerance of how much stress we can handle. A range, if you will, within which we can operate more or less comfortably and efficiently. When I say your stress becomes unmanageable, I'm referring to when things start to go outside your window of tolerance. Essentially, it means your brain and nervous system can't cope with what's happening anymore. This can be either due to the amount of things you need to handle or its intensity, or it could be a combination of these two. So why do we lose our ability to cope? The key lies in the brain. When we are in the calm, rest and digest mode, also known as the parasympathetic nervous system, we have access to our prefrontal cortex in the brain. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for things like focusing, planning, judgment, mental flexibility, and very importantly, self-control. It enables us to think clearly and make decisions that are in our best interest. And it is also involved in empathy, which is the ability to understand and share the feelings of someone else. However, when we become too stressed, we lose access to this part of the brain and operate mostly from a midbrain level then, which is a more primitive and emotional side of the brain. The reason for this is that the stress hormone cortisol changes the way our brains function. Cortisol increases activity in certain areas of the brain and decreases or totally shuts down activity in other areas. Therefore, the more we stress, the less access we have to the part of our brain that is responsible for good judgment, mental flexibility, and self-control. Cortisol gets released in various amounts whenever we have a stress response. If we stress just a little bit, we will release a relatively small amount of cortisol, which won't have a major impact on the brain. But it takes anywhere from 8 to 30 hours for that cortisol to work out of your system. Some studies suggest even up to a few days. Therefore, even many small stresses over a short period of time could eventually add up and completely fill up your stress bucket, in the same way a bucket under a dripping tap eventually gets filled up. And when the bucket overflows, that's when we get pushed outside of our window of tolerance. And to make matters worse, another area of the brain where activity also gets reduced during stress is the hippocampus. The hippocampus is responsible for enhancing executive functioning, logic, reason, and also very importantly, to see differences between current and past events. In other words, if someone's hippocampus shuts down, they are more likely to generalize and perhaps say to their spouse, "You men or you women are all the same." Because in that moment, they really can't see the differences between what's happening right now versus what happened in the past with someone else. To simplify all of this and make it easier to remember, just think of it in terms of having a rational brain and an emotional brain. And the more active the one becomes, the less active the other one becomes. So what other differences are there between the rational brain and the emotional brain? One of the key differences is that the rational brain responds, whereas the emotional brain reacts. The rational brain can take an experience or information in, process it, and then decide which response will be best for this current situation. The emotional brain doesn't think things through or see them in context or from the other person's point of view. It has a survival mode mentality. It has tunnel vision and reacts more or less in a knee-jerk fashion to whatever comes its way. But that doesn't mean we are designed poorly. We want our emotional brain to be dominant in life-threatening situations, where milliseconds could mean the difference between life and death. For situations like these, it serves us extremely well. But in situations where our lives are not threatened and there's no risk of serious harm, the emotional brain is a really bad companion. I say bad because the emotional brain can behave in irrational, aggressive, selfish, and cruel ways. And it's hard to feel close to someone who behaves that way, isn't it? That's why it's extremely important that we manage our stress in order to stay in our rational brain as much as we can. Because then our social engagement system is online. We can reason and think clearly. We can speak clearly and factually. And we can avoid doing or saying things we might regret later. And because we are able to think clearly and communicate effectively, our relationships generally also run more smoothly then. But can you see how losing access to these abilities could seriously harm or even destroy a relationship? Because how likely is a relationship to be happy and fulfilling if one or both of the people are frequently irrational, unreasonable, aggressive, or selfish? Where they can't see the difference between what's happening now and what happened in the past. And they don't have the ability to inhibit or control their speech or behavior. So clearly stress can have a serious impact on our relationships with the people we care about. It can lead to arguments, distance, and even breakups. Therefore, it's important to take steps to manage our stress in healthy ways in order to protect our relationships. Because when we are relaxed, we are capable of responding to people instead of reacting to them. If you are feeling too stressed, take a step back and try to identify the source of your stress. Once you know what's causing your stress, you can try to eliminate it or work on finding ways to manage it. So what are healthy ways of managing stress? TRE, or tension and trauma releasing exercises, is one of the most effective ways to calm the nervous system. Alternatively, you could exercise, go for a walk in nature, take a long bath, do yoga, meditate, or seek professional help if needed. Just remember, stress can be managed and doesn't have to ruin your relationships. Thank you for watching. See you next time.